On the wooden table of the court lie a sandbox for notes, a ruler, a cord, a piece of chalk, and a basket with wax. This basket is usually used to store seals for trade contracts, but today it has been placed next to a jug of water and some rough cloths. They will look for the mark of an adult woman, compare the scars with the descriptions in the new book, and pretend that physical details are the same as a knife at a crime scene. This is how a simple and terrible formula is born. A woman's body is evidence. The room is damp, and this dampness makes all words seem more weighty. There are already whispers in the market that the marks are visible to those who know how to see. In reality, what they see is fear, fatigue, and poverty. Dear viewers, I welcome you. Write where you are watching from, city and country, and whether you have encountered stories where morality has attempted to replace evidence. Your comments are important because this chronicle is about how a treatise that promised to reveal the truth of the Spirit tried to turn an adult woman's body into evidence by default, and city lawyers fought back with dry rules. Enjoy listening. Towards the end of the 15th century, a voluminous compilation appeared in the German lands, bringing together quotations, fears, and everyday rumors into a single textbook. The author, a cleric with experience in preaching and little patience for the city court, says that signs derived from shame and desire are sufficient for the judge. He offers lists of symptoms. The eyes do not shine as brightly. The skin does not cool as much. The answers to questions are not as clear. In reality, this is a convenient substitution. Instead of a witness to the act, there is embarrassment. Instead of material evidence, there is the investigator's gaze. Instead of chronology, there is a retelling of a sermon. The book is ambiguous enough to be quotable and confident enough for the crowd to decide. Now we know how to distinguish a normal adult woman from a dangerous one. The city responds not with theology, but with accounting. In the town hall, cabinets lie city ordinances, codes of custom, and collections of Roman law. In the guild books, fines for poor quality goods. In the parish notebooks, records of marriage contracts and dowries. In this paper ecosystem, everything costs money. False arrest, guards and firewood, nighttime purges, simple benches, confiscation, debt wars. Therefore, the first attempts to bring bodily trials to court are met with formal requirements. Specify the place, time, thing, name two, adult witnesses to the fact. Everything else is a description of the condition, not evidence. The town hall doctor, a dry and inflexible man, notes that insensitivity can be caused by scars, cold work, and frostbite. Midwives confirm that scars and spots are the result of childbirth and poverty. These phrases do not comfort the public, but they force the protocol to stick to the facts. The first hidden twist appears where they try to bypass the paper with emotion. The investigator, well read in the new book, asks for an examination and suggests looking for marks. Magistrates in large cities respond with the usual set of prohibitions, already known from past ordeals. No public exposure of adult women, no humiliating questions, no water trials or iron trials. Everything related to the body is to be done only with a doctor, two adult witnesses who are not related, without evaluative words, only descriptions. Where this framework is observed, cases begin to fall apart. There are no witnesses to the act, no objects, the chronology is shaky, and the economic motive is obvious. The protocol, drawn up to the letter, shows that the body evidence is not evidence, but a scenario. The second line stretches from the market. Preachers distribute leaflets assuring that truth is revealed through ritual. The crowd demands spectacle, night interrogations, joint prayers, insensitivity tests, as if hunger, cold, and fatigue were subject to staging. The city records the consequences. Adult women faint after such tests, are late for work, fights break out at shops, and the treasurer's expenses grow. Workshops complain that production is spoiled not by witchcraft, but by downtime. This is the second twist. The city's economic memory proves stronger than fear. Public rituals are cut back on the budget. Judges are given a simple criterion: no evidence, no witness, no action. The third twist comes with the first serious checks of cases by the book. In one case, an adult herbalist is accused of damaging with her gaze, but mold and bad salt are found in the warehouse. In another, the mark is found to originate from an old burn. In the third, cold skin is explained by exhaustion after winter hunger. All three cases converge in one thing: without torture, they collapse. And torture, as the clerk notes, yields a confession at the cost of health, which cannot be replaced by an object. Here, the juristicum, drawing on university traditions, raises an old norm of Roman law. Strong suspicions are witnesses and objects, not superstitious signs derived from shame. This phrase sounds boring, but in the courtroom it is louder than a scream. Fanatics do not back down. They demand more rituals, gatherings at temples, ropes around bodies, holy water as a test. Stand without trembling before the community. The city responds in the most unpoetic way possible, by taking stock of the damage. A sheet is posted on the town hall gates. What actions are prohibited for the investigator? What questions are unacceptable? What is considered reasonable suspicion? In craft houses, memos are distributed. How to draw up statements, what to bring as evidence. In the notebooks of the guards, forms appear where the empty lines for marks are replaced by fields for subject, time, place, and witness. Ritual loses its power when it is forced to be counted. From this moment on, the language itself begins to change. Female physicality ceases to be a scene for suspicion and returns to the category of condition. The court describes scars, marks, traces of hard labor and illness, and puts them not in the evidence column, but in the medicine column. This creates an invisible barrier between shame and evidence. It is held up by three pillars: the doctor, the clerk, and the witnesses. The doctor talks about the physiology of adult women without moralizing. The clerk makes sure that every step is recorded with the date and place. The witnesses are only responsible for what they saw. There will be many more attempts to break through this barrier, through divine signs, through collective confessions, through the investigators' special witchcraft knowledge. But where cities have learned to live by the letter of the law, the barrier holds. In the offices, they reinforce the barrier against the temptation to see the truth through the eyes of the investigator. A sheet with reference lines is sewn into each case: place, time, thing, adult witnesses, economic motive. Clerks rewrite interrogation forms so that traps for shame disappear. Instead of questions about night temptations, there are boxes for inventory, traces, IOUs, and doctor's notes. The town hall doctor is instructed to attend any examinations as a technical witness and to record dryly where there is a scar, where there is an old burn, where there are signs of exhaustion, where there is scoliosis from a loom, where there is dermatitis from a salt barrel. Midwives, adult craftswomen with many years of practice, become experts on injuries and postpartum marks. They know what a tear looks like, how a suture heals, how poverty and cold wrinkle the skin. Their craftsmanship cuts through mysticism like a knife cuts through thread, stripping marks of their magical status. The court does not argue about morality. It shifts episodes into the appropriate columns: physical condition into medicine, evidence into a material list. A series of private defeats of the eroticized scheme further emerges from the archival cases. In one case, an adult widow from the tanner's quarter was accused of insensitivity and a mark on her thigh, but the doctor explained that the area of thick skin was an old scar from a burn caused by bark, and the muteness was the result of frostbite in winter on a washed stone pavement. Another case was based on the fact that adult men lost their strength after her glance, but an investigation showed that the fabric defect was caused by dampness, the wine in the tavern was diluted, and there were mouse nests in the merchant's basement. In the third case, powders were found in the herbalist's shop, but each of these powders had a purpose in the inventory of the shops. Before the holiday, fish was salted and skins were dried, and the lists confirmed the purchase of salt and vinegar. These three cases have one thing in common. Without torture, they amount to nothing, because the witnesses did not see the acts, and the evidence speaks of the household, not of night gatherings. When such cases multiply, magistrates come up with a rule that is incorporated into city ordinances. Physical examinations are not allowed. Descriptions of the state have no evidential value. Torture as a last resort is possible only in cases of reasonable suspicion, and these are equal to the combination of items, place, time, and consistent testimony from adult witnesses. While paper learns to prevail within the walls, rituals continue to live outside them. At fairs, preachers explain to the crowd that truth does not like paper and arrange purifications. Adult women stand in plain sight, instructed not to tremble, not to cry, and to answer leading questions. The reports of city doctors and treasurers contain statistics. After such gatherings, there is an increase in the number of fainting spells, delays in work, and domestic conflicts. Extra expenses are incurred for security and firewood. Confiscations have given rise to new debts. In some neighborhoods, craft customers are breaking agreements for fear of becoming the subject of rumors. These reports, written by migrants out of boredom, do what loud preaching cannot. They turn moral fervor into a list of losses. On this basis, several cities have adopted internal instructions prohibiting nighttime purges without a direct threat to order, transferring all evidence of spirit to the rumors column, and requiring that any popular trial be accompanied by an assessment of damage and a report from responsible adults. The ritual fizzles out when it is forced to be accounted for. At the same time, university legal experts invited by the councils are compiling brief instructions for investigators. There are no grand words in them, only points. Distinguish between words of fear and words of fact. Record the date, time, and place. Do not touch the body of an adult woman without medical necessity and the presence of a doctor. Do not ask questions that humiliate dignity if it does not lead to an objective trace. Do not confuse rumors of marital damage with things that can be put on the table. These instructions are linked to growing criminal guidelines. In some states, texts have already been legalized that recognize torture as an extreme tool in cases of strong suspicion and not as a substitute for evidence. A few decades later, a major code under Emperor Charles V will cement this at the imperial level in 1532. But the advantage of city chancelleries is that they arrive at this logic earlier, out of economic necessity. The resistance of fanatics still holds sway through fear. During crop failures, epidemics, and fires, the crowd again demands signs. This is when the strength of the new network becomes apparent. The statutory prohibition of bodily trials is placed alongside the prohibition of trials by water and iron. Any confessions obtained under conditions of humiliation are recorded as inadmissible. The participation of a doctor in cases involving the body becomes the rule. Midwives and adult specialists are included in the list of admissible witnesses of condition, but not of fact. The court, once again, becomes a place where the ruler lies on the table, not for the skin, but for the distance between the word and the thing. In one citywide case, this is particularly clear. An adult fishmonger was accused of her touch spoiling the barrels. Instead of a ritual, the court summons a salt wholesaler, a pier keeper, and a doctor. The salt is expired, the boards are damp, the woman has cracks on her hands from winter water, and her cold skin is from exhaustion. The protocol closes the case, and the treasurer notes that the costs of this inspection are significantly lower than those of a night investigation, and that the conflict in the market has been resolved without confiscation. Meanwhile, the administration is also changing. In the guards' notebooks, the columns for marks and temptations disappear, and fields for things, time, place, witnesses, and medical description appear. A list of prohibitions for investigators is posted on the town hall gates. Do not allow examinations for supernatural signs. Do not conduct insensitivity checks. Do not ask about nights and beds, because this is humiliating and does not lead to evidence. In craft houses, sheets appear for craftsmen. How to file a complaint correctly, how to store evidence, how to invite witnesses. The city translates fear into instructions and instructions into routine. Despite all this, the filth of the world does not disappear. Adult women are still vulnerable in neighborhoods without strong protectors. Rumors spread faster than summonses. Poverty leaves marks on bodies that are easily declared signs. But even here, the framework acts as a brake. In one case, an adult widow was being pushed out of her workshop in the interests of the community. But in reality, it was to make room for the elder's relatives. The court demanded to see the lease agreement, double-checked the debts, figured out who would benefit from the confiscation, and saw that witchcraft was a mask for a property dispute. This is the quiet power of paper. It doesn't make people kinder, it makes them slower, and slowness kills the show. The body does not disappear from the hall, but it ceases to be the central object. A new layer of procedures appears in city books, which kills the temptation to judge by the body, not with a dispute, but with a construction. A set of subject divisions is added to each interrogation notebook, a separate page for facts of harm, fire, theft, damage to goods, a separate page for material traces, tools, powder, keys, clothing, and a separate page for the condition of the body, presented as a noteworthy medical detail. Scars, cracks, signs of cold and exhaustion. The clerk, previously considered a minor official, becomes the keeper of the form. He does not allow the description of the condition to leak into the evidence column. The town hall doctor introduces a scale of observations: local numbness of the skin as a sign of an old scar, diffuse paleness as a sign of hunger, trembling as a product of dampness and fear, cold as a sign of exhaustion. Midwives systematize the language of their craft. They distinguish between a birth scar and an injury, between a mark left by a barrel of salt water and a rash caused by mold. All of this is compiled into a method that strips the accusation of its romanticism. The bodies of adult women cease to be a mystery and return to the realm of everyday causes. Against the backdrop of increasingly stringent procedures, attempts to circumvent them through a combination of signs are also intensifying. Opponents of the paper machine argue that if you add up the trembling, paleness, cold skin, and poor reputation, you get serious suspicion. But the office responds with arithmetic. A combination of everyday consequences is not a combination of evidence. In one case, an adult laundress was accused of drying threads with her gaze. They collected the defective goods. They smelled damp. The workshop records showed that they had not been dried properly in the rain. There were rotten spools in the basement. The doctor noted cracks on her hands from salt water, and the clerk noted the customer's debts. The set of signs crumbles before the set of facts. In another case, craftswomen from the tanning quarter accuse a widow of skin muteness as a witchcraft sign. The doctor shows that the thick areas are burn scars from bark and hot water. The treasurer adds that the confiscation of her house is beneficial to an interested neighbor. The court puts contracts and bills on the table, and the sign loses its voice again. Where force cannot be used, they try to return through folk trials. Rituals continue to travel through rural churches and fairs. Stand without trembling. Keep your hand in the water. Show the place of the mark. The city authorities respond with a triple lock. The first is financial. Any mass trial now takes place at the expense of the community, with precise accounting for firewood, guards, and craft downtime. In the spring, the amount that citizens refuse to pay next time is written out in full in the expense book. The second is legal. Statutes prohibit bodily trials as a form of humiliation and as a source of false confessions, which have no force without evidence and witnesses. The third is medical. Doctors are given the right and duty to stop actions that are harmful to health, with a record of the reasons. This triple combination does not convince fanatics, but it deprives them of their tools. Without money, without legitimacy, and without access to the courtroom, they remain nothing more than noise. Cases appear in court files that establish a new norm. An adult fishmonger is accused of spoiled goods after touching. Inspection. The salt is expired, the barrel boards are damp, there is mold in the basement. The clerk transfers the things and conditions to the main column and leaves the touching in the speech section. The case is closed without torture, and the treasurer notes that the cost of the inspection is less than the cost of a single night interrogation. An adult weaver is accused of weakening the men around her. Investigation. The wine was diluted, work was done at night in the cold, the customer delayed payment, and the men collapsed from exhaustion. The doctor and midwives give their conclusions about exhaustion. The clerk finishes the case with the wording, "The condition of the body and morals does not contain any material evidence." These cold words teach the halls, where heat was once loved. The more such outcomes there are, the more the behavior of witnesses changes. If at the beginning of the decade, hearsay witnesses entered visions and stories into the protocol, now they have been weaned off this practice. The forms require specifics: what was taken, where it was placed, what damage was done, how it can be proven. Adult men from the guard stop looking for marks and start measuring shoe prints, counting barrels, and describing locks. The behavior of the accusers is also changing. Workshop foremen are learning to distinguish between economic losses and crimes so as not to make themselves look ridiculous in front of the council. This is institutional training in everyday life. The statute works not with slogans, but with forms. In the private records of some cities, another thread is noticeable: concern for their own administration. Influential merchants and elders saw that physical cases created credit risk. Confiscations ruined debtor families, disrupted supplies, and instead of one cleansed shop, you got 3 empty ones. Therefore, they pushed through short but tough points in the councils. No torture without a body of evidence. No physical examination unless necessary and without a doctor. No confiscation before sentencing. No public display of adult women's bodies in the courtroom. These points are not about mercy, but about risk management. When this is written down and posted, it is easier for the investigator to refuse to conduct a test. He has the paper to back him up. Opponents try another move, appealing to high authorities. They bring quotes, interpretations, centuries-old knowledge about female nature. The city responds with its own authorities, university commentators on Roman law, local customs, and, most importantly, new criminal instructions where it is written in black and white. Torture is a last resort. Reasonable suspicion is a thing and a witness, and signs derived from desire are unacceptable. There is already a hint of the future imperial code under the sovereign. The order of business must be the same from domestic theft to suspicion of witchcraft. For the crowd, this is bureaucracy. For the city, it is a guarantee that the shops will open in the morning. At the level of language, the image of women in the protocol is also changing. Previously, she was a bearer of a mark. Now she is an adult person in good health. The doctor records anemia, exhaustion, traces of hard labor. The clerk indicates housing, occupation, debts, and contracts. The workshop provides a certificate of employment. This set of sober lines brings the person back into the document, without moralizing, without humiliation, without romanticization. The court does not become more merciful, it becomes more accurate. And when a fanatic asks to read the body, a list of items is placed on the table, and the body is left to the doctors. However, the inertia of fear is longer than any instruction. In years of crop failure and epidemics, the mysticism of signs once again creeps into the courtroom. Here, only a strict framework can decide: a statutory ban on bodily examinations, the mandatory participation of a doctor and a scribe, the requirement of 2 adult witnesses to the fact, not hearsay, and a fixed cost for any non-routine procedure. This does not make the world safe, but it does make the court stable. And gradually, even those whose hearts are on the side of jealousy recognize the power of form. When the form asks for something, the ritual loses its support. In winter, when the markets were empty and the wine thickened from the cold, the fanatics made their last bet on spectacle. In suburban parishes and fairgrounds, they held purifying gatherings to restore the body's status as evidence. Adult women were put on display, required to stand without trembling, and declared signs of paleness, fatigue, and traces of hard work. These actions caused harm and humiliated dignity, a social fact that was recorded by doctors and guards, but it excited the crowd. In cities with strong town halls, the response was dispassionate. Guards were instructed not to protect the ritual, but to disperse it as a source of disorder. Clerks drew up reports on downtime and losses. The treasurer sent a note to the council, spelling out how much one such night of jealousy cost in firewood, quarrels, and repairs. The economy of sobriety fought against the economy of fear, and the former won at the box with the city keys. In several cases, this shift became clear as day. An adult craftswoman from a dying workshop was subjected to a mark inspection. The court demanded the workshop's logbook, which recorded burns from dye bark and cracks from salt solution among workers. A doctor confirmed that skin numbness was a normal scar. Midwives added their craft knowledge about postpartum marks. The protocol moved the body from the evidence column to the condition column and moved the lock, keys, contract, defective fabric, and expired salt to the evidence column. The case was closed without torture. In another trial against an adult grain merchant accused of evil eye, the swelling of sacks from dampness, mold, and unventilated basements was recognized. Guards found traces of water near the stalls. The treasurer noted that confiscation would have brought profit to the neighbor in the row. Here, the court not only dismissed the charges, but also issued a fine for false accusation. These seemingly boring stories pulled the nerve out of the tractate scheme. Without physical tests, symptoms turn into everyday consequences of poverty, cold, and neglect. Fanatics shifted the pressure to a set of signs, proposing to bring back torture as a test. Their logic was based on a passionate conviction. If you add up trembling, paleness, fatigue, rumors, and the bad luck of neighbors, you get reasonable suspicion. Lawyers responded with a list in which each item had to be a thing or a fact: an instrument, powder, keys, a letter, a promissory note, a place, a time, the consistent testimony of 2 adult witnesses, a medical report, not as evidence but as descriptive information. The instructions for investigators specifically stated, "Physical tests are prohibited as humiliating. Questions about nights and beds are unacceptable. Exposing adult women without medical necessity is illegal. Confessions obtained through humiliating procedures are invalid without evidence." This combination took away two main tools from the preachers: shame and spectacle. In everyday life, this manifested itself through small changes. Guards stopped looking for marks in courtyards and inns. They were taught to measure shoe prints and count barrels, record locks and break-ins, and draw a plan of the premises with chalk. Scribe taught witnesses to refrain from visions and hearings without dates and places, leaving only what could be proven in the protocol. The town hall doctor ceased to be a burden and became a necessity. His signature ruled out suspicion based on the physiology of adult women. Midwives were granted the status of certified experts on condition in order to put an end to gossip. This was not humanization, but engineering, removing everything from the process that did not lead to a tangible trace. Next, loopholes were closed. In some cities, short statutes were enacted stating that any mass purification must be pre-approved by the council and accompanied by accounting for expenses, and any public trial is automatically registered as an event with damages and responsible parties. Noise quickly became more expensive than evidence. Guilds, taught by their losses, introduced internal rules. Denunciations without evidence were prohibited. Complaints without witnesses were considered slander and punished with a fine. In disputes over marriage, warehouse inspections with a doctor and the guildmaster were mandatory. Guild discipline, often cruel in small matters, unexpectedly became an ally of the court. In craftsmanship, storage and working conditions are often more important than temptations, and this is easy to prove with evidence. Several court cases became educational. In one, an adult widow mason was accused of her footsteps ruining the masonry. An investigation showed that in winter, the mortar was mixed with ice water. The team worked without breaks. Supervision was weakened due to the master's illness. The case recorded the technology, not the signs. In another case, an adult innkeeper was accused of her hands taking away the strength of men. The investigation found diluted wine, night shifts, and cold in the hall. The doctor described exhaustion and tremors as the result of labor and hunger, not witchcraft. Both cases ended with fines for those who tried to cover up economic negligence with mysticism. After that, a provision appeared in the city book. An attempt to replace objective causes with a set of signs was an aggravating circumstance when imposing a fine for false denunciation. The most dangerous wave came with crop failure. The crowds demanded simple answers, and the treatise once again became a convenient crutch. The inertia of already accepted rules helped here. Statutes where physical tests were placed alongside ordeals automatically repelled the attack. An investigator who risked violating the ban risked his position and a fine. A judge who attempted to replace a thing with a spectacle risked a review of his cases and the wrath of the Treasury Chamber. A couple of high-profile penalties cooled the fervor for years. At the same time, university legal scholars explained to the councils that reasonable suspicion did not consist of 5 weak signs derived from shame. It grew out of 2 or 3 strong facts that could be laid on the table and shown to an outside eye. This formula, cruel to rhetoric, saved the city's economy. By the end of the decade, a procedure had been established in large centers whereby physical cases no longer resulted in torture. First, an inventory of the damage and belongings was taken. Then, witnesses to the fact were sought. Then, a medical description was made as a condition without evidentiary value. Then, a check of motives and benefits. And only when there was a combination of solid evidence would a request for torture be made as a last resort. less often approved than rejected. Fanatics called this coldness. The city called it order. Hidden in this tedium was the main twist. The treatise became not a code of law, but a stumbling block that broke cases built on eroticized assumptions. When such practices were put on paper, the myth and the document diverged completely. The myth continued to repeat that the Inquisition sees the truth with the eye of the spirit, and that the female body betrays itself. The document showed the opposite. Where the court demanded evidence and witnesses, cases built on shame collapsed without torture. Where torture did occur, it produced not truth, but disability and unsubstantiated confessions, which the magistrate no longer accepted. Against this backdrop, there was only one step left to the final stage: statutes that would enshrine direct prohibitions on bodily trials and bring criminal procedure to a common denominator. Evidence is things, words are records, and the bodies of adult women are a medical matter, not a currency for sentencing. By spring, clerical habits had already overtaken rhetoric. In cases involving harm, the page of evidence was opened first, then the page of witnesses, and only then, if necessary, was a medical note attached as a description of the condition, not as evidence. The clerks learned to return to the protocol everything that the crowd tried to pass off as a set of signs: trembling, to cold and malnutrition, paleness, to poverty, skin numbness, to scars from labor. The town hall doctor and midwives took their place in the chain not as preachers, but as craftsmen of observation. Where yesterday they offered to read the body, today they demanded a key, powder, a letter, a place, and a time. This tedious discipline made the final step possible. The decisive knot was tied by statutes. The councils of large cities introduced short but firm lines. Corporal punishment was prohibited as humiliation and as a source of false confessions. Public examinations of adult women, without medical necessity and without the participation of a doctor, were prohibited. Questions about nights and beds were recognized as inadmissible, since they did not lead to material evidence. Confessions without evidence and consenting adult witnesses were deemed invalid. Torture was permitted as a last resort only in cases of strong suspicion, which was understood to mean evidence, time, place, and witnesses, rather than signs derived from shame and desire. These statutes placed eroticized schemes alongside ordeals in the forbidden basket of procedures that the city no longer finances or recognizes. Fanatics tried to circumvent the framework through external rituals, but stumbled over the economy. Any purifying gathering required guards, firewood, a hall, and the treasurer considered this a loss. Workshops, taught by downtime and defects, introduced their own regulations. Without evidence, a complaint is equivalent to slander with a fine. In disputes over quality, a warehouse inspection, with the participation of a doctor and a foreman, is mandatory. An attempt to replace the specific cause with a set of signs is considered an aggravating circumstance. Thus, guild discipline, far from mercy, unexpectedly became a pillar of defense. Craftsmanship requires evidence, not spectacle. What followed was a matter of inertia. Where statutes and forms were in force, cases based on physical evidence were dismissed at an early stage. Scribes returned the accusers to the facts, guards measured the traces, and doctors recorded the conditions without moralizing. Rare attempts to break the ban on physical examinations were followed by penalties, dismissal, fines, and case reviews. Several such cases became an indicator that the paper did not simply advise, but enforced. At the same time, university interpretations reinforced the formula that cities had previously arrived at through practice. Reasonable suspicion is based on facts, not feelings. Evidence and witnesses are a bridge to torture, but torture itself is not a bridge to the truth. In the imperial framework, approved by the sovereign in the mid-16th century in words, this logic was given capital letters, but in the markets and shops it was accepted in advance, out of fear of losses, not out of love for abstraction.